Hello, everybody, and welcome to Old Ones. This is the first episode of my new podcast, where I will be talking about old ones, aka old video games, retro video games, everything about retro video games from consoles, specific games that we like to play back in the day, uh, accessories to these consoles, everything and anything you can talk about old video games. This is something that I am quite passionate about, I guess. I'm a collector of old video games, as you can see right here. I have a few displays of my old games in my office here, and also many other in my living room / basement. And I thought, why not create a podcast that I am somewhat passionate about and hopefully spark some conversation, spark some nostalgia for people. I'm an incredibly nostalgic person. And that is kind of why I wanted to start this. I have so much to say, and I think there's so much to talk about, since there's many things from the past that we can bring back and talk about and reminisce and just have a great old time talking about these things that from our past were such a big part of our lives. And now maybe you don't have as much time to play. Maybe you do play a ton and you're just looking to hear someone talk words into your ear about things that you play all the time. Personally, I don't have so much time to play these games, which is some of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast. It can give me a little extra push to play some of these games, and I've recently started to make myself play these games. This first episode, I kind of just wanted to go over my personal nostalgia for these old pieces of machinery, these old games that we used to play, and give you an overview of my nostalgia for them and my favorites. I'm a 30-year-old Canadian, so I was alive for the birth of the Nintendo 64, but also I was not alive for the birth of the Super Nintendo. Or the NES, or anything before that, basically. So, my first consoles I ever played were the NES and the SNES. My grandma had an NES at her house, and my dad actually played the SNES at his house, which I only found out many years later that he even played video games, because a lot of times you think your parents, growing up, hate those things. They hate those machines that you like to play, and they buy you these old these games, but they don't really touch them, or if they do, they play it for a minute and say, oh yeah, that was fun, and then they walk away. I actually had a really good childhood with my dad. Actually liked video games, even though it didn't seem like he did. He would come on and play the PS2, and he would have a great time playing ATV Off-Road Fury. I think it was 2 or 3. And he liked to play some of the Jak and Daxter games, which, into the next couple podcasts, and even this one I might mention, but, Jak and Daxter was such a big part of my childhood. I still am a huge fan of those games, and I know some people have difference of opinions of the first one to the second and the third, and then of course Jak X, which ended up being not a disappointment, but just a different game entirely. But let's go back a little bit and talk about just where I grew up, what brought me into the gaming world and opened my eyes to what is video games and all that. And I mean, like I said, the first gaming consoles I ever played were the NES, Super Nintendo, on the NES, we had the original Mario with the Duck Hunt cartridge, which was awesome to play, and we had the gun and everything for Duck Hunt. So that was the first eye-opening experience I think I ever had. And then of course we had Mario 3, and then a couple other games. The one with I don't even remember what it was called. The one with the balloon, and you had the guy that flies around, and you just try to take out other guys with balloons. That one was a lot of fun as well. And back then you could kind of just have that quick fun, but you could play it for like hours, because you just sit there and you would just, you and your brother or whatever, or your sister would just sit there and you just hand the controller back and forth, or even just sit there and watch them, because I was a younger brother. And of course the older brother kind of took precedent, and I would have a blast just watching these games be played by anybody, really. Anybody that was, especially if they were competent at the game and actually were really good, which is, I think, when it comes to YouTube, what really brought a lot of people to YouTube and to, watching these Let's Plays of people that are playing games. Sure, they may not be the best at them. Some of them are. Some of them are very good. Some of them are incredibly good at games. And some of them are just very entertaining to watch. And honestly, I get almost as much enjoyment out of watching people play video games than I do playing my own games. It's weird. And I think, recently I've had less time to even watch or play the games. So I just listen to podcasts when I'm working, or when I'm in my vehicle, and it brings that little bit of nostalgia back for me, just listening. And I thought maybe creating my own podcast could help myself, and maybe other people have that same experience. So what really, as a kid growing up, when I was born between the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64, that was a huge bridge between 2D video games, which I grew up playing a lot of, but also 3D video games, right? The NES, or the SNES, was a cornerstone for 2D gaming. It was like the end of the 2D gaming era, and as you got to the end of the SNES's lifespan, it was like they were perfecting the 2D experience. That you had so many 2D games, obviously two launch titles, F-Zero and Mario, Super Mario World. That's the one. I was blanking on the name real quick. And those were like, to be a launch title, were like amazing video games. Going from an NES, where, yes, by the end of the NES, you had some incredibly good games that were pushing the boundaries of what the NES could even do, to the SNES, where they were making games that was just like, to this day, the colors and the overall 2D vibe that you get off of a SNES game is insane. You look at them at you can look at them. I'm on my computer right now. I've got 4K monitors. I've got, incredible setups here, and you fire up a SNES game, and it's insane to think that was like, how many years ago? Over 30 years ago. And to this day, they look amazing, because 2D really does age incredibly well. Now, of course, not if you look back at like Ataris or those gaming consoles. They maybe didn't age quite as well, but their art style was a little different, and they couldn't really put as much on it. But the Super Nintendo was like a cornerstone for, and of course, you can't talk about the Super Nintendo without talking about the Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis arguably had better art style and better graphics for a lot of games, but I think the Super Nintendo had that like minimalist, almost bright colors. They didn't try to pack too many colored pixels together that would get misconstrued into different things. It was very like, obviously they had some games that did maybe, but overall they did such a good job at showing you what it was with what they had. And then jumping to the N64 era or PlayStation 1, where everything changed. Everything changed. You had your first 3D games to ever be released. And the aging of those games maybe hasn't worked out so well. Like, they have not aged quite as well as the Super Nintendo has. But the nostalgia is still obviously there. Those consoles are looked at as some of the most nostalgic, especially the N64, man. I know there's lots of people that shit on the controller or the fact that, you know, the games are very, let's say aged. The controls, the visuals, you know, I have a controller right here, and the analog stick, or the stick, and it's not an analog stick, I don't think, but the stick was, maybe it is, I'm not really sure. And that's where we're gonna find out. It really, it was a great console for the time, but it also needed upgrades to even just play specific games. And I didn't own, as a kid, I didn't own any of those games that you needed expansion packs for, or that you needed memory cards for. I had very minimal N64 games when I was a kid. Like, my parents didn't buy us that many games. They would buy us a few games for a console, and then we would play the crap out of like every game we had. I think we had 3 or 4 games for the N64, which now you look at it and it's like, that's nothing. That's nothing compared to what, like, you know, we have now for video games. I would say I'm more of a PC gamer as of last several years. I've played a lot of PC gaming, but I also have a Switch, which I do play quite a bit of. But I don't have any of the newer Xbox or PlayStation consoles. Newest Xbox console I had was a Xbox One, which, you know, looking back at the Xbox One was a bit of a misstep for Xbox, and I think really ruined some of their momentum that they had with the Xbox 360. But really, it's either a PC now for me or retro games. I go back and play all these N64 games, Super Nintendo games, Game Boy Advance games. Those are such amazing games to just like sit back on a couch on a handheld and just play the heck out of. Maybe not so much the N64. You could play it on your Switch with the Switch expansion thing, which I'm arguably not a huge fan of. I do like the Switch that you can have a Nintendo membership for like $20 a year, and you get like the basic version where it's like you got the Nintendo, the NES, the Super Nintendo, and some of those Game Boy games and Game Boy Advance games or whatever. But if you want to pay like way more, you can get, and I think with the Switch, is it the regular Switch or just the Switch 2 that you can get GameCube games? But either way, they're working on getting some of these older games on those newer consoles. I don't love the way they're doing it. I wish they would do something like they did with the 3DS or the Wii U or even the Wii, where you just like you can just buy those old games, and you don't have to like almost emulate them through a subscription service, and they only have specific games. I mean, they have a good catalog, but I digress. But sitting back as a kid, and I was quite young when the N64 was about 5 years old. I was able to I was at that age where you were starting to play video games. I still wasn't fully able to play games, I guess. But I was able to remember seeing these games and even playing them, even if I wasn't very good. One of my favorite games, when I went over to my friend's house, because I didn't own it myself, but was Mario 64. And that is probably the bridge that brought me back to playing some of these old games. That and Ocarina of Time, because I never actually really played Ocarina of Time as a kid. I knew one of my friends in elementary school had it. And I think my brother borrowed it for a bit. And playing it back then, I wouldn't have even known where to start. It was such a game to wrap your head around at the time that you could just get lost for like hours and hours and hours. And I would have fun just running around and not really accomplishing anything, because I didn't know what I was doing, but just running around, throwing bombs at things or just killing random enemies and then dying and being like, oh, okay. And then you just keep going, and you had no idea what you were doing or where you were going or what it was even remotely that they wanted you to do. But I still had fun with it until, you sat there for an hour or two, and then you realized, okay, I've had enough. And then you go back to a game that you just swapped games, and then you start playing another game. And, when I got to the age where I was actually competent at video games, like where I was at least decent. I was old enough to comprehend what I was doing in games. The PlayStation 2 and the GameCube were out. And I think that was probably the age where I was like, it was perfectly timed, where I was of age to understand these games and really put hours in and play games that weren't just Mario, run around, jump on things, and get to the end of the stage and then go to the next stage. And that's obviously why Mario is as big as he is. It's so just wide open to everybody. Everybody can just pick up a Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario World, whatever it is, and just run to the end of the stage, get to the end of the stage, move on to the next world, and just play at their own momentum, at their own pace. They don't have to use their brain so much as just play the game, and eventually you might win. You might get to the end of the game and you might win, right? Whereas games like Zelda or games like I don't know, any RPGs were like I think the most accessible RPG, and one that really molded my life, was Pokemon. I was also born right when Pokemon even came out. I think Pokemon was the original were 95 in North America, and that's the year I was born. That was the year that I was born. So we had, I still have it on my shelf. I've got yellow, red. I've got my Game Boy there. We did not have blue. I bought that semi recently, and I've got my Game Boy Advance there, which you can't really see the other games, but beside it, I've got gold, silver. I don't have Platinum, and then I don't remember. I think I have Wario 3 or something, Wario Land 3, or maybe it's yeah. And then I've got Game Boy Advance games up there, which I've got. I used to have Emerald, and that is probably the biggest mistake of my life, is not taking care of that Emerald more, because one day when I got nostalgic and I was like looking through my mom's place for all my old video games, I could find Sapphire, which is up there, you just can't see, but I couldn't find Emerald, and I searched and searched and searched and searched and could not find it. And my best guess would be my brother took it and went to one of his friends' houses and left it there and never got it back, because my brother's a very forgetful person, let's say. And so for him, he's not a nostalgic person. He doesn't care. A lot of those games I brought from my mom's place, and now I have my own house. And I brought all the old games, set them all up, put them all in order, and have them on a display. And I'm that, just looking at those games, it brings so much joy. It brings so much joy to like just look at them. They have the art styles that's just mwah, mwah, chef's kiss. Like they have that. And it's obviously, I think, nostalgia for me, because of a kid. I feel like if a kid born recently would see them, they wouldn't even know what they were. They would see a PS2 or whatever game, and maybe they knew, they probably know what the console is, maybe, if they know video games, but it wouldn't bring anything to them, because they wouldn't know what it is. But I'm sure some of the art styles and some of the cases and you know, the cartridges, the Majora's Mask cartridge, which has the holographic Majora's Mask, or whatever you want to call it, where you like could move it and it changes. It's also gold, the gold cartridge. Like some things like that, you just can't bring. Well, you could bring back, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same. At the time, it was like, whoa. And even now, it's like, you look, for us who were living then, for us, it's like, wow, that's like, that's awesome. Like, that's so cool. And now it's like, every game's going to be digital. And even if they have a solid copy, like, yeah, some manufacturers do a little extra if you buy the like cool collector's edition, where they give you like a pin and whatever, and they try to make it as cheap as possible, but also give you a little extra. And I think one of the cooler ones back a long time ago was like Halo would do some cool ones, or even The Witcher 3 had like a big old map that came with it and all that, and that was kind of cool. And I don't resent any newer video games or newer video game memorabilia, just because I still see the vision, and I still see that many people love those games, and we are kind of living in a renaissance of new games. I think you see a lot of games that are coming out now that are like, you know, definitely better than the old games. Like definitely, like 100% are better. They've got so much more in the games. They've got like way better graphics, which I would argue doesn't really matter, but they can do so much more with a system now than they were able to back in the day. It just, for my money, I would rather just play some of those older games. And that's probably the nostalgia talking. That's probably where I differ from some of the people that love those new games. And in this podcast, I will cover newer games that come out, or newer consoles. Just recently, the Switch 2 came out, and I don't have one. I don't have Switch 2. If this ever gets off the ground, if this podcast ever if anybody listens to this, I would love to start to upgrade things and get newer consoles and PS5s. Those would look amazing. Which, I mean, at this point, if you look at it, a PS5 is already many years old already. Like, it's so weird to think that we're living in a time where now even the PS5 you look at is like, it's getting to mid lifespan for sure. And what's next? What's next? The new consoles are basically just computers, other than the Switch 2. Like the Xboxes, Series, whatever you have or want, they're just computers. And I know Xbox is moving away from hardware manufacturing, and PlayStation doesn't seem to want to slow down. But the PS5 even is like it's basically a computer that just is specifically for video games. But it will never match the nostalgia of a new system either being rumored or being talked about at school, or even when a new console releases and you get to see the new this one's got different cartridges, or this one's got discs, or it's got bigger discs, or it's got a DVD player, which the PlayStation 2 was like. The PlayStation 2, for my money, and I know if you were a little bit older at that time, it would even be something that you would have looked at and been like, this is amazing. But like, for my money, the PS2 was like the cornerstone of video games. I believe it's still the highest selling video game console of all time. And I think the Switch is close. Let me look that up real quick. I got my computer in front of me. Oh, don't know how to spell. Most sold console. Most sold consoles. The PlayStation 2 is the best-selling console of all time with over 160 million units sold worldwide. That is bonkers. That is insane that they were able to sell 160 million units of a video game console back when gaming was not even as big as it is today. That is like... That is wild. The DS is second. The Switch is third. That I guess maybe at those times, like, because the DS was also kind of around that time of the PS2. So at that time, I think gaming consoles hit a peak. I'm not going to say it's the all-time peak, because obviously the Switch has now almost sold more than the PS2. But like, it really was, for my money, the best era of video games was like the PlayStation 2, and then of course the GameCube was also a competitor, and then what was it, the Sega Dreamcast? Was it Dreamcast was at the time. But it was an all-encompassing... Hell, the PS2 had USB ports. What? It was so ahead of its time. Like, it had USB ports, which at the time, if you're a younger person listening to this podcast, which I would venture to say there aren't that many people that were born after the PS2, but if you are, the PlayStation 2 having USB ports on the front was like game changing. But also, for some reason, it had I believe 2 USB ports, and it had just 2 like 2 controller ports. Like, it didn't come with 4 controller ports, which at that time also would have seemed to make sense to have 4, right? Like, even the 64 had 4 slots. The PlayStation 1 did not. The PlayStation 1 had 2, I believe. And then also memory cards in the system, the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, which you had to buy separately, of course. I personally had 2 PS2s. And maybe that's why they were so well sold, because everybody had 2 of them for some reason. I venture to guess that was a divorce problem, because at that time divorces were like skyrocketing, and that's partially why I had 2 of them, because we were at that time, me and my brother were like heavy gamers. We played so many video games. We had Game Boy Advances, which we played all the time. And then, the PS2 came out, and we were just getting to that age where we would have like a little bit of money our own. And we could maybe buy games. My brother would buy most of the games, and I would just mooch off of those games. But the reason why we had 2 consoles is because we'd have one at my mom's, we'd have one at my dad's. So we didn't have to transfer these consoles back and forth. They were also incredibly cheap compared to, like, hell, even they were incredibly cheap for what they were. They were not only a gaming console, which, yes, they were a gaming console and the best gaming console to ever be released at the time, but also a DVD player, which I already mentioned, and CDs. DVD player, CD player, and a gaming device, and the best one to be released. Like, it was amazing what they were able to do with this system. Now, of course, it seemed really cheap. It was $300 at release, $299, which you might think now it's like, oh wow, like the Switch is $500 at release. But you also have to think of inflation. The PS2 was actually, with inflation, more expensive, believe it or not, and was actually very close to the PlayStation 5 release price. So the nostalgia of looking back and just remembering as a kid that this system was so cheap for what it was is actually kind of skewed. It's a bit skewed because it was $300, but that's the equivalent to $550 of today's money. And that's American. I'm a Canadian. That is, I mean, the exchange rates have changed a lot since then, 2000. So at the time, sometimes the Canadian dollar was even par with PS2, so it could have been $550. You never know. But right now, it would have been over $600 for a system, which, then you look at it, it's like, oh well, it wasn't that cheap, but it was cheap for the time. It was incredibly cheap for the time to have a DVD player and a CD player and a gaming device, and then they also made it aesthetically pleasing to put into your home entertainment system. And I think this is the first console that they needed to make it look good, not just for the kids that wanted to play it, because video games were looked at, as a child's toy. This one was looked at as a home system device. And it looked basic. It didn't have anything that you're like, oh wow, like that's amazing. The SNES was like a gray box with purple highlights, and then even like the Super Famicom was also just a gray device, had zero highlights other than just like the logo, which was multicolored, and then the controller also had multicolored buttons. But the PS2 had small highlights. It had blue and like a gradient blue, but it just like had that edgy kind of made for older, the teenager age range, but also your parents wouldn't be like, get that off of the shelf because it looks like a child's toy, out of all the like things you had on your shelf with your television receivers and whatnot. It looked like a TV receiver. It's what it looked like. And for me, the games on that system, they released so many games for the PS2. They kept releasing PS2 games after the PS3 had come out. And this is where I'm going to get into kind of where I'm going to draw the line with retro, say that in quotes, because some people might be like, "Oh, that's not retro. That can't be retro. That's a newer system. That wasn't out that long ago." No, they were released a long time ago, which is the PS3, the Xbox 360, and the Wii. That is where I'm going to draw the line when it comes to retro. And the older heads of the people that listen to anything that I'm going to talk about might be like, yeah, those aren't retro. That's not a retro video game. That was on the Xbox 360. That didn't come out that many years ago. I'm sorry to let you know this, but the Xbox 360 came out in 2005. That was 20 years ago. Let that sink in a little bit. 20 years ago. Somebody that is in Canada that is 20 years old can drink legally, can buy alcohol legally. Now, there's different provinces that have, 19 as their drinking age. Some of them have 18 as their drinking age, but it's not over. None of them are over 20. Now, of course, in the United States, the Xbox 360 would have to wait another year to drink, but they could still buy cigarettes, and can vote. The Xbox 360, the PS3, and the Wii can vote. So, I mean, come on. So anybody that is 20 years old now would barely have been born when those systems came out. Because right now it's August, and the Xbox 360 came out in November of 2005. So if they were 19, they wouldn't have been born when these systems came out. I was 10 years old when the Xbox 360 came out. I was 10 years old. Wow. Wow. Yeah. See, I was even very young when these systems came out, which is insane to even think about. So that's where I'm going to draw the line when it comes to retro games. And I will talk a lot about Wii games, Xbox 360 games, less about the PS3, because the PS3 was, in my eyes, I don't want to say loser of the console wars at the time, but like it had a very slow build. I think the 360 and the PS3 at the end of their lives were pretty neck and neck when it came to sales and all that. And I think the 360 the PS3 may have taken over, but they changed they changed everything about it by the end. The 360 had such a boom. I had a 360, and it had I think what made the 360 was the Xbox Live and the party chats and the the online gaming. That's what made the Xbox 360 that much better than the PS3. I don't think anything else really made it a difference other than the price as well. I believe the 360 was quite a bit cheaper than the PS3 when it came out, because the PS3 was incredibly expensive. Now, there's so many people out there that are like, well, actually, it was worth the money. Well, yeah, I'm not saying it wasn't worth it. I'm not saying the PS3 wasn't worth the money. It was loaded with features, like loaded. They wanted to make something that was like, it could do everything. You could download movies. You could have libraries of music. You could play music while you're playing video games. It was crazy. And then obviously the PSP was kind of then. I have a PSP. I have quite a few PSP games actually, and had fun with the PSP. So I will talk about PSP games as well. I know that doesn't get a lot of coverage when it comes to gaming talk. Also, when I was talking about the video game wars, Xbox 360, PS3, we all know who won that age of video gaming, and it wasn't either one of those. It was the Wii. The Wii was like a phenomenon. It brought Nintendo back into everybody's house. Because before that, they had floundered a bit. Like the 64 did not do well. The GameCube did not do super well. The Wii, holy smokes, like, sheesh. The Wii was special. And I have a lot of memories of the Wii. I playing Wii Sports, playing Mario Galaxy, playing Smash, playing like so many games that a lot of people have such fond memories of. But if you were maybe an older person at this time and you looked at the Wii as like, that's a gimmick, that's trash, it's not regular gaming, you play like weird motion games, and it wasn't sit back with a controller and play games. It still had its place, and obviously it blew everything out of the water, which it was amazing to even fathom. My parents even knowing what the Wii was. They didn't give a rat's ass what the fucking Xbox 360 and Sony PlayStation 3 were. They knew about them maybe because I had a 360, but they wanted a Wii. My parents wanted a Wii, which is like, why? But it was just this thing. It was just such a phenomenon. And in this podcast, I will talk about many games for the Wii, the console itself, and really, this first episode I wanted to encompass kind of everything that I am going to talk about with this podcast. I'm gonna not just start at the beginning. I'm just going to get into anything I want to talk about. And most episodes will be more centered around a specific game or specific console or specific controllers or peripherals for the consoles, or whatever retro video game encompasses. This one is just a first episode where I wanted to jibber jabber about stuff that I find nostalgic and get a little bit more for you guys to learn a little bit about me, maybe, and hopefully I can get some comments or whatever of you guys telling me what you find nostalgic, or you find entertaining, or you find interesting, because I find all of this very interesting, and that's kind of why I wanted to make this. I have such memories of everything from the NES all the way to, Xbox One, but I'm not gonna harp on the Xbox One. Past that, I think is more modern, quote unquote. But there are times where maybe I will do a game or I will talk about a console that maybe you don't find to be retro. But it's still part of the gaming world, and it can make good, entertaining podcast styles and all that. And if somebody's really harping on something that maybe people don't find retro, I will talk about it. I will also talk about new games sometimes. It'll be very, very seldom. But if it's something that is like exploding and people are talking about and something that I find interesting because it is, after all, my podcast, I will talk about it. And you just have to live with it. And maybe if it's not for you, then, you don't have to listen to it. But that's the beauty of podcasts. There's probably many, 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 many episodes that maybe you don't find super interesting because maybe you didn't play the game or you didn't have the console or whatever. But learning about something that maybe you didn't know about before can be interesting. And for me, I would also like to talk about stuff that I didn't have as a kid and maybe never owned or maybe just recently got. And I will play a game or I will buy a console or whatever it is and then talk about it, right? That and through my eyes, I will talk about what it would have felt like recently to play or back in the day would have, and mix it up and have that nostalgic talk or the more modern eyed talk about things that entertain me for video games. And I would love to have people on one day where I have maybe listeners or people that enjoy my content that are also very passionate about something. And I would love to have guests to have that back and forth where we can talk about games, we can talk about consoles, we can talk about controllers, we can talk about whatever we want. Because video games are such a massive, 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 massive thing. And I think there's so many things to be touched on. And everybody has such a different viewpoint of different games, right? And different consoles and different everything. So that's kind of my spiel for how I want this podcast to sound or to look or to just be. I want a community of people that just love these old games, these old video gaming, everything. And it's called Old Ones. Yeah. Because I know there's so many people out there that just love a good old video game. And that's been my time. If you guys enjoyed listening to me just ramble about old systems, old games, then hit subscribe, follow for more, comment if you'd like, rate if you'd like. Where I'm going to be posting this probably on YouTube and anywhere else I can try to post it. Obviously, this is the first episode, so I'll do my best, but YouTube's probably the best place to start at, and then hopefully work my way into other podcasting services or whatever. I have no idea if anybody will listen to this. I'm sure there probably won't be that many. But yeah, I've been Andrew Tursky, and this has been Old Ones. Thanks for listening. Peace.